lot of these guys are afraid of rejection. They're afraid to put themselves out there. And so to basically avoid that uncomfortable experience in the first place of approaching and taking risks and talking to a girl, instead they just like immerse themselves in these statistics and develop these elaborate, pseudoscientific uh, explanations.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we've got on another brilliant guest. This is Rob Henderson. He is a writer and psychologist with lots of interesting insights about the human condition. So welcome to the show, Rob. How you doing?
Hey, Zuby. Thank you. Yeah, good. Great to be here.
No doubt, man. I've done a brief intro there, Rob, but for those who are not familiar, please introduce yourself.
I have a PhD in psychology from the University of Cambridge. I studied psychology at Yale for undergrad. I have a book coming out called Troubled, a memoir of foster care family and social class. February 20th is the publication date. And yeah, I've had a kind of an unusual, winding, indirect path to higher education. Grew up in foster homes in Los Angeles. Never knew my father. Fled that environment as soon as I could, enlisted in the Air Force when I was 17. And yeah, did a couple of tours, deployed, traveled the world, and then eventually landed at Yale, studied there on the GI Bill. And that was 2015. So in the book, I talk about how I witnessed kind of the birth of what people now refer to as wokeness. This term hadn't quite caught on back in 2015. It was still sort of in the embryonic stage, but I was seeing sort of the beginnings of cancel culture and what was occurring. And so, I document that at length in the final third of my book. A lot of that is kind of the reason why, despite having a PhD, I haven't pursued a traditional academic path and didn't become a professor. And so now I'm mostly known for my writing on Substack and, being on Twitter and sort of creating this alternate path for myself as a writer.
Yeah, no doubt, man. I think you're very much a free thinker. The term is overused sometimes, but when I look at the content you put out there, or I listen to your interviews or see your writing, it's a range of very different, sometimes disparate topics, just really about what's going on with humanity and society and culture and where are we all trending, not just seen through a sort of simple left-right political lens like a lot of people do things, but with some real insights and thought behind it. So props to you, because I think that is cool.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I try not to, I think, a lot of people want to sort of categorize people, put them into boxes, and then they want to know, oh, well, why are you saying this? What does this mean? Are you coming at this from a left perspective, a right perspective? Are you progressive? And, don't get me wrong, like I obviously have my disagreements with a lot of the sort of political correctness movement and all of that. Like, yeah, a free thinker, I think, that's, I'll accept that. I like that. But it's just, I wish more people would sort of adopt that way of thinking about things. You don't have to take a stand politically on everything. You can just sort of see where the truth leads, regardless of whether it is consistent with this ideology or that.
Why do you think that is so rare?
I did my PhD in psychology. I studied a lot of evolutionary psychology in grad school, and it's a rare person who doesn't want to be, this is kind of pejorative, but like a herd animal, right? Like you want to be protected, you want to be accepted. There was a study that came out in 2017, which found that this was a worldwide survey across different cultures, different societies, which found that so personal safety, like literally, your physically intact body, that was like kind of the number one concern and priority that people had, was like, not dying, not being infected, injury, and so on. But number two was reputation. People were very concerned about their social image, of how they're received by others. And there are good evolutionary reasons for that, in the ancestral environment 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, your reputation was critical. Being accepted by others was critical. A human would be sort of unable to be self-sufficient in the Pleistocene, in that environment of sort of hunting and gathering. You needed to have a community in place. And we still are equipped with that same psychology today. And it's very uncomfortable, I think, for people, even people I know who are independently minded, free thinkers, but they've experienced some version of cancellation. I can see, like, they've sort of confided in me that they felt the anxiety and the pressure and the stress, and like it's a very like there's this line from Aaron Sorkin about how getting attacked in the media is like being seasick, where like you think the world is ending and everyone else just thinks it's kind of funny. um, and I think there is something to that from the outside it's hard to understand, but like when you are that person and you are taking the slings and arrows, I fortunately I haven't been in that position necessarily. But I understand it from that kind of evolutionary psychological lens. I think that's helpful at least to understand it, but that doesn't necessarily excuse it, right? We don't live in an
Mm.
environment like if you are canceled, if you take a stand on something, your life's not going to end. You're going to be fine. You know where your next meal is coming from. It's not like that. Like we can exert a bit of control over that anxiety and to be more willing, I think, to speak our mind.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation because I feel like you don't even have to go back to the Pleistocene era, right? You don't need to go back tens of thousands of years ago because it always has been, even in modern history and to this day, it is still true, right? I mean, you absolutely should care about your reputation. I mean, if someone didn't care about their reputation, they'd probably be some type of sociopath or psychopath. I mean, people like to say, even in the online entrepreneurship world, who cares what other people think? Like, you shouldn't care about other people's opinions. And I'm like, well, you should. You should just be judicious about whose opinions and which opinions you care about, right? If you're totally afraid to ever rock the boat in any way, shape, or form, you're going to live your entire life as a coward and you're never going to do anything interesting because you'll be so afraid of risk. But at the same time, if you genuinely lived your life not caring about what anybody else thought of you, you would not be you wouldn't be very well socially calibrated. You wouldn't really be able to do anything. You wouldn't, even if you're independent, like someone like myself who's been working for himself for over a decade, I still rely on my audience and my customers. Like, if nobody liked me or trusted me or supported me, and I wouldn't be able to earn a living. I don't need to keep a boss happy, but I can't just be like totally. I've got a family. I'm going to have my own family. I've got friends. Like, I genuinely care a lot of what they think about me. But I think that I think it's one of those things where there's a balance to be found, right?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah, well, yeah, to varying degrees, all of us care about a reputation, and we all, at the end of, we have someone to answer to, whether it's the boss in the office or your readers and followers and subscribers and people who are interested in what you do. Um, so yeah, it's a perfectly reasonable thing. But I think there's a difference between sort of willingly flouting social convention and just being a just being a rebel for the sake of it versus you hold a principle that you think is important and it may upset people, but it's something that you believe is true and that you believe by withholding it, you're actually making the world a worse place by not speaking your mind. And I think in those cases, like I understand, like if you work a normal day job and you have children and you have mouths to feed and so on, like there's, you have everyone's risk profile is different. But I know a lot of people who tenured professors, for example, who are surprisingly cowardly for certain things, despite the fact that they'll always have a paycheck, despite the fact that they are already sort of secure in their occupational position. And yet, even they, if they hold a principle or a value that they think is important, but they're unwilling to speak their mind. So, it's important. Yeah, context varies. Everyone's risk profile is different, but yeah, it would be nice if more people who were in a position to do so were sort of less afraid, I think. And I think we are starting to see that over the last couple of years. I think people like you actually are important. Like one thing that I think like influencers and people like thinkers and public intellectuals and all these kinds of people who do speak their minds, you sort of give other people permission to do this.
Mm.
If you express an opinion, you post it online, you do a podcast, you share some view of yours, you're also sort of sub-communicating to people like this is a normal thing to say, and it's okay to say this because it's true. I believe it's true. It aligns with reality. You don't have to be bullied and berated by, society or social media or coworkers or other people into silencing yourself. So yeah, I think it's good that platforms like yours exist.
Yeah, thank you, man. It's part of the reason why I do it, to give other people the encouragement and, as you said, permission to know, oh, okay, I can do or I can say that thing or I can at least think about it or have a conversation.
Mhm.
Um, do you remember what the third thing was? on that global poll. So you said number one was the physical safety and integrity. Number two was reputation. Do you recall what the third
Oh,
thing was?
that's I think the paper didn't even look at that, like, because the main point of the paper was about reputation, and so they were interested in where it ranked, and the fact that it ranked number 2 was just like a fortunate coincidence. What was interesting about that paper actually though is that in some cases this didn't even seem to be the case, that it was subordinate to your physical safety. There were cases, and again, these are just, sort of psychological surveys. It's not this is what people say. It's not really necessarily measuring behavior, although they do this. But one of the studies they did, they basically just asked participants in the study, would you rather have your arms or your legs amputated, or for everyone in your community, your friends and family, and everyone you've ever known to believe that you were a Nazi? And most people said, I'd rather have my arms or my legs amputated. They did the same for pedophile too. Like Nazi and pedophile are like the
Mm.
two like archetypes. Those are those are the most evil things now in our society. And it's yeah. So like pedophile or arms, and most people said I'd rather have an arm or leg amputated. The other interesting study that they did in this paper was they had these were college students at a university, and what they did was they had these students take the researchers had these students take the implicit association test, which you may be familiar with. It's this thing that supposedly measures how racist you are, or how
Mhm.
sexist you are, how homophobic. And it's kind of, there are question marks around how accurate this test is, but this was a few years ago when people seemed to have more confidence in this test actually being legit. So they had these students take this test, and they basically rigged it, where some of the students, they told them, we're sorry to say, but like this test, we found that unconsciously you score in the 99th percentile for one of the most racist people who ever took this test. And we're going to, like, unfortunately, because of the way the study works, we're going to post your name and your score on the university website, along with other people's scores, but your name will have the score next to it as one of the most sort of highest racist. I don't know how they got away with this through the ethics board, but they managed to do this. And they said, we're going to put your name on the website. And they weren't going to do this. This was all kind of later on. It was revealed that this was all part of the study. But we're going to put your name on the website. However, we can remove your name from this list and not have it go up on the website. But what we need you to do is to help us with this other study. And the other study was that they had to put their hand in this jar of like beetles and earthworms and like disgusting insects. and and it's like a very sort of physically uncomfortable, disgusting, repulsive experience. And they found that the majority of people would rather go through that disgusting experience than have their name go up on the website saying that they're the most sexist person or the most racist person in the school. And so I think this was an interesting sort of example of like, yeah, we care about our safety and our body, and like we don't want to, put ourselves at risk in that way. But we also care a lot about like, people would, if you believe the survey, if people would actually go through this, who knows? But people say they would rather lose a leg than be thought of as a pedophile or a Nazi. And so I think in some cases, yeah, this is you know, reputation can be just as important in some ways. People will, I think, yeah, they will sort of incur physical danger and harm and put themselves in perilous circumstances if it will bolster their reputations, right? I'm thinking about like young guys who, do dangerous stunts or skateboarding tricks or something. Like people are willing to damage themselves if they can bolster their self-image.
Yeah, for real. I mean, for millennia and to this day, it's a primary recruiting technique for the military, if you
Hmm.
think about it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
but
if you
do you mean like
associate
the
it with that.
process?
Yeah, well, what I mean, the idea of honor, glory, being a hero, that type of messaging will make men risk life and limb if they think that they're going to be rewarded, even posthumously, as some type of hero.
Hmm.
It's always been the way that it's been sold for thousands, millions of people to go out and sometimes fight wars that are not not defensive or necessarily justified. But hey, if you do this thing, you're going to be a hero.
Hmm. Right. Oh, yeah, yeah. That's okay. So yeah, they're sacrificing or potentially sacrificing their material body for this immaterial
Mm,
ideal of honor or legacy or status or respect or something along those lines. Yeah, and I think yeah, for young people especially, this is like a pervasive concern. Something I've long been interested in is this idea of status and how people are preoccupied with it to varying degrees. And yeah, I mean, it's something. I think people don't necessarily think about it in a conscious way most of the time. Like when I enlisted in the military, and I remember like how proud people were of me and all those things. Like it was it's just like a nice feeling that people try to pursue and try to satisfy, even if they aren't like 100% fully aware of it. Just how responsive we are to the opinions of others.
Yeah, absolutely. It also, some of the things you're saying about reputation, it's also not surprising because you can see how it manifests in the real world. I mean, one of the most common fears amongst human adults is what's called glossophobia, which is just fear of public speaking, right? The vast majority of adults are afraid of public speaking. And if you think about it, it's not the speaking that they're afraid of, right? We all talk to people all day long, every day. So if someone's afraid of public speaking, what are they really afraid of? It's connected to reputation, right? They're afraid, oh, I'm going to stumble or I'm going to trip up. I'm going to be made to look foolish amongst the public, right? If I say the wrong thing, if I fall over as I'm walking on stage, if I say a joke and it doesn't land, and my peers or colleagues or friends or family are in front of me, or even strangers, I'm going to be judged, right? I get people who are like, Zuby, I want to start a YouTube channel, but I'm afraid of it. Like I'm like, well, you're not afraid of opening a Google account and pressing the button to create a channel. You're probably not afraid of like setting up a camera. You're probably not afraid of talking into a microphone, but you are afraid that you might put the video out there and either no one watches it and you feel like a loser, or people watch it and they leave mean comments and they downvote it and you feel like an idiot. That's what it is. So I think actually so many fears next to the ones about basic survival, it's all about, well, what are other people going to potentially think if I do that? And I think it stops people from doing things that are just sort of very simple, safe tasks just because they don't want to even open themselves up to any type of criticism or judgment.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And there are people who will like weirdly take this like armchair critic stance of anyone who does put themselves out there.
Hmm.
Anyone who is in the arena, who is putting their thoughts, their podcast, their writing, anything, and putting themselves in a position where they're sharing their views, and others will. I think there is that kind of there's that envy, that jealousy that a lot of people have, and it comes out in weird ways because they would like to actually do that too, and they want to, throw some barbs and some insults at you, but deep down, a lot of these people just wish that they had the courage to do the same thing themselves. Not all of them. A lot of people are just like, nitpicky jerks, but there are like, there are people who would love to actually start a podcast or actually start, an online writing platform or something, tweet more, whatever it happens to be, and they just get angry at others for doing that, and they want to tear you down. And yeah, I think the point about wanting to have high regard, and the fear of public speaking is an interesting one. I mean, I've read about this idea, the Yerkes Dodson curve, this idea that there's like an optimal level of anxiety when you perform in a public space, and how if you have too little anxiety, you actually don't perform very well because you basically aren't taking the task seriously enough. You're kind of lethargic. And if you're too anxious, you jittery, your nerves get in the way, and you can make some blunders. But when you have this sort of moderate level of anxiety, of your heartbeat elevates, blood pressure rises, cortisol shoots up, like all of those things. There was a researcher, I think it was Naomi Eisenberger from UCLA, but basically she wrote this very interesting paper. One of her claims in this paper was that the reason why our body, like we have this involuntary physiological response to public speaking, is because, and she took this sort of evolutionary lens on this idea of, in the ancestral environment, if you were in a position where you were being judged by a large number of people, your body is responding to the possibility that you'll be ostracized or attacked. Um, and so essentially, like all of those physiological responses, cortisol and blood pressure and so on, is your body's preparing itself to be wounded. And so that it will activate the fight or flight response so that you can very quickly run and heal from your wounds and recover from those kinds of things. And that was, again, this was a hypothesis. This was not like necessarily. This wasn't like an empirical study, but I thought the idea of it was fascinating. That you know trying to attract the attention of so many people at once was a little bit unusual. You were sort of bidding for status for a leadership position in that sort of early human environment. And there was the possibility that people would reject you or not like what you had to say or ostracize you or vilify you in some way. And your body was preparing itself for some kind of attack or sort of banishment. And today it's like, it's not like that. It is
Mhm.
surprising, like just how fearful people are of public speaking. But I guess I sympathize. Like I understand it. I think one thing that a lot of young people lost during the lockdown years is that they didn't have that experience, right? Like one of the
Mm.
benefits of college is like for people who do go that path is college is supposed to prepare you to be a bit of a sort of in a white collar position where you present and you are supposed to occupy some leadership kinds of roles in many cases. And it gives you a low stakes way to like present your little PowerPoint on your little senior project or whatever in front of other people. And you're not going to be attacked. You're not going to get fired. You're not going to lose your paycheck. It's just a little thing you'll get a little grade on. And I think the Zoom presentations are not like they're not legit, right? Like those things were silly. I was a PhD student. I was supervising some students at this time. Like everyone's mailing it in. No one's really taking it seriously. You need to actually be in person and have those uncomfortable experiences. I think uncomfortable experiences in general are important. And yeah, I think a lot of young people during those 2 or 3 years, we lost a lot um, of sort of that resilience that could have been developed otherwise.
Yeah, as well as the opportunity to just develop those skills.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because a lot of people talk about confidence, and I've had people, young men in particular, ask me, how do you become so confident in XYZ, or just in life in general? How do you become a confident speaker? The way you carry yourself, the way you talk to people, whether they're men or they're women, old or young, whatever it is. And I'm like, well, there's a lot of hacks that people talk about on how to fake confidence. Fake it till you make it is a very commonly known phrase. But I think that true confidence comes from competence. So there are many areas that I would be completely not confident in because I'm not competent in them. If someone threw me into the cockpit of a plane as it's in midair and is like, all right, fly, there's like my confidence level, it goes from my typical baseline confidence, which is quite high, down to near zero. I don't know how to fly a plane. I don't know how to, there's many things I don't know how to do. If you wanted me to speak on specific subjects, if someone's like, all right, Zuby, 5 minutes, you need to jump on stage and, give a 20-minute presentation on astrophysics or on string theory or on the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict. I'm like, bro, like I'm not competent enough in these areas to do this. Therefore, I'm not confident. But if they want to, give an impromptu presentation on the importance of physical fitness, or tell the story about your life over the last 15 years, or how you started your music career or your business, I'm like, cool. I can talk about that for, give me an hour. I can riff on that with no preparation forever. So I'm super confident in that regard. So in relation to what you're saying, it's like they also just didn't get the time to build the competence, right? No, you don't naturally. Sure, some people are great orators or they have some talent for it inherently, but like anything else, you have to practice. You get good at listening by listening a lot. You get good at speaking by speaking a lot. If I go back and I listen to episode 1 or 2 of my podcast, I'm going to find, ooh, I'm not speaking as competently, and I'm making more mistakes, or I'm using more sort of vocal fillers, and I'm interrupting my guest quite a lot, and this and that. And it's like, oh, actually, after doing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these, now I feel very confident where I could sit down with anybody, from Elon Musk to Ben Shapiro to Joe Rogan, and I can sit down with them for a couple hours, and I'm not feeling like, oh my gosh, like I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. So yeah, the
Yeah.
competence creates confidence.
Yeah, putting in the reps, right? I think that's an underrated force where people, like anyone who's just discovering, Zuby's podcast or someone's, YouTube channel or whatever, like they think like that becomes the sort of default benchmark of how well you're supposed to do without thinking about the thousands of hours and the reps and everything that goes into that. I mean, I think about the same thing sometimes when I look at like when I look at other writers that I enjoy reading, and I look at their early posts or their early days, the archives that go into the back, and I think like, wow, this has changed a lot in the last 3 years or 5 years. Someone's book, I look at like the earlier manuscripts or the earlier phases of their writing career. I look at my own posts from the early days on Substack, and yeah, it's changed and it's evolved and it's gotten better. And yeah, it just takes time. It just takes I think that's like a shortcut that most people can't afford to to skip. That's just part of it. And so yeah, a lot of young people, it's good. Yeah, the young people are sort of seeking, many of them are seeking that sort of magic sauce, the secret sauce of like, how do I get as good as you in 2 weeks? And it's like, no, like to get even sort of in that, you need at least 2 years, you need 5 years, you need like a lot more time, and you need the experiences, and you need to have some setbacks too, some failures. You need to learn, and it's one thing to have like sort of like even if you were to put the last 10, 15 years into a manual, into a guidebook or something, that's one thing to have that sort of theoretical abstract knowledge, but to actually go through it, you're still going to have unforeseen blunders, someone else trying to like model their career off of something that someone else wrote. It just doesn't work that way. You have to live it yourself and go through it yourself in many ways. I think learning from others can help, and getting advice from other people can help, but ultimately, you can read books all day, and you can read guidebooks all day, and listen to advice all day, but ultimately, like the best thing is to just get out there and put in the
Mhm.
reps and start doing it. And gradually it'll be self-correcting, right? Like the feedback you get from the world and from other people, that will be more critical in shaping your success and your trajectory. I think that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't shortcut. There's no substitute for experience in anything. In anything, it's good to listen to and read other people's experiences and to get advice and to talk to people and to learn. But I mean, you can read, this goes down to anything, right? You could do all the reading on nutrition and strength training and cardiovascular training and stretching, right? But like, you can, no matter how much reading you do and how many athletes you talk to, if you don't do the training and you don't do the food and the stuff, like you're just going to stay the same. You could sit there and you might be curious about Japan, and you can read all the books about Japan. You can go on Google Maps and you can like look around and see what things look like, look at the buildings, whatever it is. But there's no substitute to just getting on a plane, go to Japan, spend a few weeks or months there, see what it's like, soak it all in. And that's really, it's why I recommend travel to so many people, because especially in this day and age with the internet, I think people think, oh, well, I can talk to someone from that country, or I can like see posts on social media, or I can do a Google search and I can look at images. And I'm like, man, it's not the same as actually going there, right? You're not gonna, there's no substitute for the experience. And I think that maybe it's always been this way, but particularly in the internet and social media age, I think that it's created this instant gratification and shortcut mentality. And it's created some very strange comparison points where someone will see someone who's been doing something in many cases for decades, from decades. And they'll, number one, they'll assume that they just started at the point that they're currently at. Um, right. So I get this a lot myself. So in the past 5 years, I've had a significant rise in my popularity and following and success by many measures. I mean, I've been I released my first album half my lifetime ago, and I've been on social media since about 2003. I've been on Facebook since 2004. I've been on Twitter since 2009. I created my YouTube account in 2006, even though I wasn't really actively using it. Right. So people see things now, and I'll get people who are like, oh, well, you know, like, well, it's easy for you to say that because well, you've got a million followers, or you're connected to Elon, or you're connected to this person. I'm like, dude, I started from zero. I had zero followers. I had no connections to any of these people. I hadn't done anything, and it's taken time to get there. Or someone will see you in the gym and be like, "Oh, like I wish I had your genetics," or "I want to look like you in 5 minutes." And you're like,
Yeah.
"Bro, I I'm 37 years old. I started going to the gym when I was 15. I've been
Hmm.
training for 22 years. You're not going to come in 2 months and start outlifting me. Like,
Hmm.
just you've got to do those reps, like literally and metaphorically."
Yeah, that's well put. That yeah, like everyone starts out with 0 followers. Everyone's like when they first step foot in the gym, they're not, they're not in great shape, right? Like they haven't actually worked out. And so people yeah, people's sort of point of comparison is yeah, it's just it's a weird thing, right? Because you open up Instagram, you open up Twitter, you open up any social media platform, and you're mostly following people who have large followings because those are the interesting people, right? Like there are plenty of people who are interesting who don't have that many followers, but they're just not on people's radar yet. Like they haven't reached that point where they have the spotlight on them. And so yeah, most of the content that we see, they're created by people who have been sort of at it for a while, who've sort of learned and grown and been able to communicate interesting thoughts or images or uh, their experiences in a certain way. And yeah, of course, when you start out from scratch, like I wonder if like maybe there's some kind of like if someone could start this like an account or something of like here's your favorite influencers. Here's what their account looked like when they started, and you could actually just follow those, and that gives you a more accurate picture of what the early days look like. Um, I think actually that would be helpful for a lot of people. But yeah, for me, like I think one maybe advantage that I've had is like I don't really have that impulse that much. I mean, it exists from time to time, it flares up, but generally speaking, I actually don't feel that. If I see a successful writer, a successful thinker, or person who's doing well on social media, I generally don't feel like, oh, I wish I could do that overnight. I'm like, I respect the work that went into it, and I try to keep in mind that there are things that you're not seeing, right? Like for every viral post, for every hit that you see, there are probably many other posts or podcasts or essays or something that person has written or attempted or tried that haven't actually done that well. There's a lot of sort of behind the scenes that you're not um, focusing on that person isn't necessarily trying to present to the world. And that's just the reality, right? There's that famous line. I don't remember who it is attributed to, but something about how most of us are comparing our bloopers to everyone else's highlight reel. We're comparing sort of the wrong parts of our lives to other people's lives, and it's funny. Like a lot of people actually know that rationally in their like logical mind, they know that that's the case, but they still when they scroll Instagram or social media, anything, they're suddenly like, oh, I wish I had this person's life. And it's like that person's showing you a narrow slice of themselves, and I think even for me, like I wrote a whole book about my personal life, but even then there were decisions I had to make about what to leave in and what to keep out. And it's like no one's ever getting 100% of the full picture except for the person living that life. And that's something I think we could do more to try to understand. We're really only seeing what maybe 5% of the person,
Hmm.
and there's 95% that we are not seeing.
Yeah, I actually I have an idea for a book or a movie that's very related to what you just said. And anyone listening, you are totally welcome to steal this idea because I have no interest in writing this book or making this movie. But I have this idea for a plot where you have someone who is in this mindset who thinks that everyone else just has a better life than them. They're seeing
Hmm.
people who have a lot of money, or they've got the hot girl, or they've got the nice watch or the car, or they're the CEO of the company, or whatever it is. And this person is just wishing and wishing and wishing that he could swap lives with
Hmm.
other people. And then the concept would be that this actually happens and he lives, you get to experience other people's lives, not just the highlight reel, as you said, not just the superficial things you see at the surface, but then you see, oh wow, okay, this person has this problem in his, like, you live their life and all their problems, all the crap that they have to deal with. Someone might be like, oh, I want to be Elon Musk, I want to be the richest man in the world, and then you actually get to be the CEO of SpaceX, of Tesla, of X. You've got like hundreds of thousands of people counting on you. You've got foreign governments like hitting you up. You've got the media trying to kill you all in one day. Like you right, like you now have to deal with all of their stuff, right? You don't just
Mhm.
get Elon's money, you get all of Elon's problems, you get all of his security threats, you get all everything. And I think that the sort of moral of the story would be like, be careful what you wish for. Don't just assume that someone's life is inherently better than yours because you're just seeing the little surface level snapshot. and you also haven't had to go through like all of their history and experiences and struggles, but then you suddenly sort of take that all on.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be yeah, I'm surprised no one has done that. Like, that is a really that'd be a great yeah, that'd be a great movie. I mean, that we're not really seeing the sort of the interior lives, the difficulties. I mean, because we yeah, even with someone like Elon, we do like we can make like well, some of it is just like public knowledge, but yeah, the media, like we can sort of piece together just all of the things he has to deal with, at least the sort of on the public side. But then yeah, the internal doubts and all of the stress and everything else that comes along with being in that position of all of the sort of emotions and the ups and the downs and the yeah, just everything that goes along with that emotionally and internally. Like who would want that? I mean, I think most people, a lot of older people I've noticed are actually kind of capable of that, of like realizing like, there are certain advantages to living a simpler life because you don't have so many responsibilities weighing on you. This is almost like a naive young person's fantasy of what being rich is like or being famous is like, of just like, oh, you just get to like go to the front of the line at a fancy club, or you just like, nice people come up to you and ask for your autograph or to get a selfie or whatever. And it's like that's like the maybe some of the nicer parts of it, like a very thin slice of it. And for the most part though, there's just so much more going on, so much yeah,
Mm.
difficulties and doubts and stress, and people everyone wants a piece of you. I mean, I have like 1/10 of 1% of like some actual famous person, but I'm getting a bit of it over the last couple of years. And yeah, it's just surprising like how quickly your calendar can be filled up. Like people are always trying to steal your time and take it. Like, I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not like yeah, I think people just have like a mistaken view of what, like having any level of prominence is actually like. There's like yeah, there's this advertising executive, Rory Sutherland, who you may be familiar with, where he says like the optimal level of fame is to like be recognized at an airport once in a while. And I think actually a little bit more fame than that would be nice, but not much more. Like once you get to the point where you like literally can't go outside in public anymore. Like I've walked with Jordan Peterson through the streets of Cambridge, and like you can't live like a normal life anymore. Like within 10 minutes, immediately a crowd is following you. It's like I think like maybe the first time it happens, maybe the 10th time it happens, it's kind of cool and novel. But like by the 100th time, when you realize like, oh, I just want to go around the corner and like get some groceries, and you can't do that because of, like you mentioned before, security risks and
Hmm.
this, that, and the other. Like that is actually not that's not something I think most people would actually enjoy.
No, not at all,
Mm.
man. And then you see that level, and then imagine, I don't know, Beyonce, Eminem, just to be like Eminem, as from what I've heard, like he doesn't even like leave his house, man. Like he's just right,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
because it's I'm like, dude, that sucks. Like that's just a prison.
That's
There, like
yeah.
people are like, oh, I want that level. I'm like, man, I've thought about this quite deeply myself. About okay, what
Mm.
level of fame, popularity, notoriety would be even what I like the level I have right now. It's cool. I get recognized like quite a lot. It's always fun, positive interactions. I can do meetups in different cities and countries, and people want to hang out and meet me, and it's all really positive. But I'm aware like there's levels, and I've met.
Mm.
I mean, at this stage, like I've met a lot of people at different levels, and I've seen how they move, and I've met people who they have them and their families have 24/7 security
Yeah.
everywhere they go. They're moving around, they're just in the gym, the bodyguard is there. They're just like at a restaurant, people are moving ahead of them like armed secure. I'm just like, man, that's a bit much. And then
Yeah.
I'm aware like there's other levels that are much even higher than that, and I'm just like, actually that would not really be that is not the optimum. You've gone way past the optimum level here.
I wonder if there's almost like a reverse of that, like, being recognized once in a while at an airport is the optimal. I think like there may be something like you've surpassed what optimal fame is like if you can't just like go into an in and out and eat a burger without being mobbed, right? Like I still would like to have that level of freedom. I think most people would like to have the level of freedom of, if you want to just like go pick up some groceries, or you just want to like sit down and have a meal, and if a couple of people come up and say hi, they like your stuff, that's cool. But if like literally you can't even go outside, right? Like that is without, without being interrupted and being, harassed or mobbed. Like that is
Mm.
not not a fun life, I think. I mean, would it be worse though? Like, what do you think would actually be worse? Like being completely unknown, like anonymous, no one knows who you are, nothing, versus being completely mobbed. I'm actually not sure which I would which I would prefer, because I could see pluses and minuses to both.
I think that as long as you had money and basic level success, then anonymity.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think if you were like a billionaire, it's
Mhm.
probably better to be an anonymous billionaire
Mm.
than one who's like recognized absolutely everywhere. Like if those were the sort of if that were the dichotomy, I think it
Right.
would be much better and safer to be
Mm.
the anonymous one, because then you don't
Mm.
need to because then you don't even need to deal with all this stuff, right? You're not gonna you don't have as many, the security risks, and you need to do this. And imagine that you have children, you have a wife, you've just gotta constantly be moving in terms of like safety and protection and secure. And think of people trying to like scam you and defraud you or freaking kidnap your kids. Like there's some gnarly stuff that's out there in the world.
Yes.
Um, and you, yeah, I don't know. It's there's definitely levels to it. I want to switch subjects a little bit, Rob, because I know you've talked a lot about the idea of luxury beliefs. This
Mm.
is a term that I myself have used in multiple podcasts. I'm certain to always give you credit whenever I mention it. I think I actually mentioned it in my podcast with Elon Musk when we were talking about some of the sort of homelessness. And no, I don't know. It wasn't about the homelessness in San Francisco. I actually used it in reference to some of the things that are done under the name of so-called environmentalism and climate change and so on. About how there are certain nations, especially developed Western countries, who have sort of built themselves off of fossil fuels and certain things, and then they want to sort of pull up the ladder on countries like China and India and African countries and whatever, and start sort of having this mentality. When people are pushing, oh, just ban fossil fuels, and you're like, dude, no,
Yeah.
like that's not going to work on a local
Yeah.
level, let alone an international one. So
Yeah. Yeah.
tell me about luxury beliefs.
So the luxury beliefs idea, I developed this concept, this framework in 2019. It arose out of personal observations that I had at Yale, and then later at other elite universities, and then when I was doing my PhD at Cambridge. And then through sort of a careful reading of the sort of sociological and psychological research on class and status signaling and those kinds of things. But luxury beliefs are ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while inflicting costs on everyone else. And a core feature of a luxury belief is that the believer is sheltered from the consequences of his or her belief. And so, if you espouse a certain view, it makes you look interesting, it makes you look sophisticated, you're signaling your levels of education and cultural capital and position in society. And often you'll get plaudits from your similarly affluent peers. But once that view becomes implemented into policy or becomes popular in the culture and sort of spreads throughout society, other people will suffer. And often the people who are espousing the beliefs experience little to no penalty whatsoever. And yeah, the climate thing is interesting. I mean, I just saw these survey results reported. It was in the Wall Street Journal. I think it was from Rasmussen. They reported these results, basically comparing the views of ordinary Americans to what they termed elites. And people debate, and there's a lot of sort of bickering. What does elite mean? Well, in this survey, they defined elites as Americans with a postgraduate degree. So, basically MBA, master's, PhD, law degree, and so on, just professionals. Postgraduate degree, earning at least $150,000 a year, and living in metropolitan areas. So it's not the perfect, not the most perfect definition, but I think it gets, it's pretty close to understand. When people picture an elite in their mind, I think that's definitely consistent with it. What do these people think compared to ordinary Americans about things like, banning fossil fuels or banning, gas stove tops and any kind of combustion engines and you know implementing rationing policies around electricity and meat consumption? And essentially, the elites were far more, like the majority of them, like 70+% were in support of this, like rationing meat. uh, like that is just insane for climate, for the climate. Whereas the vast
Yeah.
majority of ordinary Americans were very much against it, like strongly
Mm.
opposed to it. So there's this massive gap between elites, people who are highly educated, financially comfortable, successful in their careers, and they have these weird views around social experimentation and what people should eat and what people should drive and how people should live their lives. And within their own countries, of course, but then also, yeah, like you mentioned, in developing countries, other countries that are also trying to reach a certain level of industrial development. And once you reach that point, then all of these benefits arise from having an industrialized, developed country with healthcare, with adequate nutrition, with um, infrastructure, all of those things. And the elites, the upper class, the people who are very fortunate, primarily ensconced in Western societies, um, they are, yeah, attempting to kick away the ladder. And there's an interesting sort of genealogy around the luxury beliefs idea. My claim is that luxury beliefs have, to a large extent, not completely, but to a large extent, replaced luxury goods. People do still signal their status with their material possessions, but it's more difficult to identify who's rich and who's poor today relative to 100 plus years ago. An example I've given is, if you walk through the streets of Manhattan 100 years ago, it was very clear just by how people were dressed who's rich and who's poor. The rich guy is wearing a top hat and has a pocket watch and a monocle, and it's just very clear that he's a member of high society. And poor people, it's very clear who's wearing clothes that poor people would wear. Whereas today, it's not necessarily clear. Material possessions are a noisier signal of social position. So there was this book in 1899 written by Thorstein Veblen, who was an economist and sociologist, and that was his main point of this book. He wrote this book, The Theory of the Leisure Class. Um, the upper class at that time, in the turn of the 20th century, wore tuxedos and evening gowns and went to expensive and lavish events. They had butlers and servants and took part in expensive hobbies and activities like golf, expensive sports like beagling, a lot of things that that only rich people could afford to do because ordinary people had to work, many of them manual labor jobs. Um, and so that was how the rich expressed their status. They exhibited it through what they were wearing and what they did. And then if you fast forward about to the mid 20th century, there was a sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu who wrote a book called Distinction: A Social Critique of the Judgment of Taste. And this sociologist, he coined this term cultural capital. And his claim was that what the upper classes will do is, they'll basically convert their economic capital into cultural capital. They'll spend money to learn about intricate and expensive ideas and develop their tastes and their habits. At that point in the mid 20th century, it was like learning about the intricacies and subtleties of art and wine and furniture and all of these kinds of arcane subjects that only someone who went to a certain kind of school and had a certain kind of education and upbringing would be able to develop and invest the time and the resources into learning. Um, and I think today, luxury beliefs are essentially a manifestation of cultural capital. That if you're able to present some, basically exert the kind of intellectual acrobatics necessary to explain why, we should be rationing meat and no longer drive certain kinds of cars or defund the police or say that we should be, basically downplaying the importance of marriage and promoting polyamorous relationship arrangements. All of those things, if you are a highly educated person, they make you sound sophisticated and interesting. And it basically shows that you went to, a certain kind of university. You went to an expensive university. You read the right publications. You listen to the right podcasts, and you are basically like plugged into that kind of cultural elite, the taste making class. You know what sophisticated views you're supposed to hold. And it's funny. There was this book that came out a couple of years ago by Michael Knox Barron about WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. These were the American ruling class from the mid 19th to the mid 20th century. And the author, Michael Knox Barron, writes about how many WASPs would support fashionable movements uh, because they upset what they described as the vulgarians, the masses, ordinary people. So I'm going to support movement X, Y, or Z. In part because yeah, it'll make me sound sophisticated and interesting, but also because I know that the deplorables, the vulgarians, the masses, like this is so at odds with how they look at the world that it gives me a bit of pleasure to know that they're upset about this. That if I'm promoting polyamory or how we should be eating bugs or whatever, like it's going to upset them. So let's promote this movement a bit more. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but ultimately the luxury beliefs idea is, look at the position I'm in. I'm at or near the apex of society. And that's really, I think, what's driving a lot of the luxury beliefs idea. And some of it I think is malice, but I think a lot of it is just naivete too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because there's quite a range of luxury beliefs. I think that
Mm,
they sort of range to silly and goofy to downright potentially destructive to society if they were actually when they're actually implemented, or if they were to be adopted on any type of scale. Right.
mhm,
I think
mhm.
an obvious example from recent years is the defund the police, abolish the police thing. Right. It's like, okay, the people saying that are not living in communities and areas where there's lots of crime or gang violence and stuff like that. You're totally isolated and physically separated from the potential threat. So you can be sitting there in your nice house and be thinking, oh, this sounds like a nice idea. It sounds kind of cool and progressive or whatever. And then you did actually have places that implemented such policies, and lo and behold, as any reasonable person would predict, what happens? Crime rate goes up, shoplifting goes up, more people are becoming victims of assault, and so on and so forth. And something like that is very destructive. Or you could even take sort of open border policies. Again, you have people who are like, firstly, they don't live anywhere close to the border physically, um, and they're just totally separated from the whole battleground and all the problems. Their jobs are not going to be at risk, right? If you're there earning over 150,000 a year, you're probably not worried that an illegal migrant is going to come and take your job or force your wages down or something. However, if you're on the lower end of the socioeconomic scale, and all of a sudden your city, state, or country is flooded with hundreds of thousands or millions of new people who are happy and willing to work for lower wages, then now you've got to compete with all of that and you bear the brunt of it. You brought up the whole idea around marriage and family dynamics, right?
Mm.
So again, people can talk all this talk about, oh, like marriage and monogamy is out there. They're sitting there in their heterosexual monogamous married relationship, and then they're there preaching to the masses about like, well, you don't have to do it the way I did, right? Just do whatever the heck you want, or it's outdated or whatever. And sure, their kids are probably going to be fine and insulated. But if other people were to adopt that and actually put it into practice, then your society is going to be in major trouble. Because
Yes.
sure, I'm sure you can find like a handful of people out there where doing all this weird, gnarly relationship dynamic, like it works for them. I'm sure there's an exception. Okay, cool. Like they've managed to figure the thing out, but the vast majority of people who try it do not. And if you were to actually do this and be like, okay, like let's make this the norm across millions of people, then that's the kind of belief that could actually crater your entire society.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, the marriage one, that was like one that, I mean, that might have been like one of the original luxury beliefs for me when I first started developing this idea. I mean, I remember like where I grew up, like no one was raised in an intact two-parent home. I mean, I was raised in foster homes. I had friends raised by single moms, one friend raised by a single dad, another friend raised by his grandmother because his mom was on drugs and his dad was in prison. I mean, that was like a kind of normal um those were like very normal stories in the kind of working class area of California where I grew up. Um, and then I get to Yale, and literally just about everyone is raised by both of their birth parents. And if you look, I mean, if you just look statistically at like college educated women, 90% of college educated women, college educated mothers are married, 90% of them. Whereas for people whose highest level of education is a high school diploma, among women, among mothers, um, something like 60% of births are out of wedlock. And so it's just a massive sort of class and educational disparity there. Um, in 1960, 95% of kids in the US were raised by both of their birth parents, regardless of social class. And if you fast forward to 2005, um, for the upper class, it dropped slightly from 95% to 85%. So a slight dip. But for the working class, it dropped from 95% to 30%. So massive, steep decline. And again, this is like based on, this can't necessarily be the result of economics because there were poor people in 1962. Um, and actually, poverty in 1960 was probably worse because that was a lot of that was before the sort of Great Society programs and all these state benefits. So a lot of this has to be the result of cultural forces too, of the examples that elite set. There's a lot of good research that elite opinion actually does contribute to how people live their lives and develop their habits and so on. The examples that they see around them from highly respected people, whether on TV or through pundits or just sort of it's in the air, the atmosphere of which ideas and lifestyles are acceptable and praised and which ones aren't. And it used to be marriage used to be very respected and praised and kind of the default path for people. And now it's if you want to, you can. If you don't, it's okay to, it can range as far as like actually marriage is, yeah, patriarchal, oppressive, and you shouldn't do this. And meanwhile, the women, in many cases, and some of the men too, who are expressing this view, they themselves are highly educated, the products of two-parent families, and they themselves plan to carry that benefit forward and get married and raise their own kids. Um, and so, yeah, it's just there is that kind of element of duplicity there that these are extremely. Yeah, so it was funny what you said about relationship arrangements. That certain people maybe they can find a way to live in a polycule and make it work for them, and like if you want to live with your wife's boyfriend, like somehow that can like work for them, whatever. but I in most cases, if that works, those people tend to have unique personality profiles, unique, educated, just atypical. Maybe it works for them. But for people who aren't in that category, the same categories of personality and education and all those other things, if they attempt to live that way, often it will break down very quickly because, for most people, they have natural feelings of jealousy and, romantic commitments and all of these things. And if you introduce other people into that relationship, things usually will fall apart very quickly. And what it reminded me of is actually this idea around like veganism or vegetarianism that if you are again like unique personality profile, highly educated and affluent, you can invest the time and the resources into like basically mapping out your diet in a way that you can still receive adequate nutrition without eating meat. But if you're a poor person in a developing country and you hear Western elites saying you shouldn't be eating meat anymore, like what are your options as far as like receiving adequate nutrition? And I remember, Zuby, I was sitting at this meeting at Cambridge University with all of these like, these Cambridge dons and these professors and so on. And there was this girl with me. She was another student. We were both PhD students. She was from the Philippines. And I knew her a little bit about her background and how she had grown up in a village and sort of, got on scholarship and managed to get into Cambridge for a postgraduate degree. And all of these, like, highfalutin Cambridge professors were like, I don't understand why people even would like to eat meat. Like, don't they understand? And, like basically adopting this very snooty elitist attitude around, like, why would anyone even eat meat? Like, why shouldn't vegetarianism or veganism be the default? And it's like, okay, if you're a professor at Cambridge and you have a PhD and you've never had to worry about where your next meal is coming from, that's one thing. But like, I'm like, this girl, young woman from the Philippines is giving me the side eye because like her parents are living in a village and like meat is something to look forward to, right? Like if you're working backbreaking labor, working hard all day out in the sun and you don't have that many sources of nutrition, like what is she supposed to think about what these professors think of her and her family and her culture? And like, so yeah, I remember she and I would talk. She wasn't a political person, but like that was in a moment that radicalized her. and and she was like, "Oh, this is not the kind of place I thought it would be," because there's a lot of messaging at these kind of institutions around tolerance and open-mindedness and diversity and so on. But then once they actually start to learn about how people from developing countries think or their lifestyles or what they do, they actually disapprove of a lot of it. Like anyone who doesn't live like an upper middle class, highly educated person, like they actually do. Many of them, not all, but many of them do actually look down on those people or think of them as backwards or retrograde.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. There's so many interesting points you raised there. I was going to say that, you were talking about these like polycules or whatever. I think what is really going on there is like there's just massive amounts of cope, right? Like there's
Mm.
just right. Like
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of cope going on, and the thing is, anytime you even um, talk to or see on the internet people who are like trying to work out these type of situations, whether it's on Reddit or anything else, they're all there like, we're trying to do this thing, but like I keep feeling jealous. I'm trying to get over my jealousy, and I'm like, bro, that is the feeling you are supposed to have. Like
Yes.
this is not whether you're coming at this from an evolutionary perspective or from a religious perspective or from like a just sort of sane critical thinking perspective, like they're all there trying to like how do I get rid of this emotion, how do I stop myself feeling this and whatever. And it's like, dude, you do it by doing things the way that people have generally been doing them for thousands of, like, our ancestors didn't come up with these institutions and ideas just to be mean and restrictive and like hyper intolerant or whatever. They're like, okay, this is the dynamic that we have found works. Funnily enough, they found out that this works in like all of these different nations and societies with different traditions and whatever. They're like, okay, this is generally what works. And all of a sudden, in this sort of enlightenment era, people are like, actually, you know what, let's go completely against nature, let's go completely against everything that seems to make sense, and let's try to just overcome all of these barriers. It would be like, do you know what it would be like? It would, let's say there's some disgusting thing that I'm just not supposed to eat, right? It looks disgusting, it smells disgusting, it's like nasty or whatever, right? And I'm there trying to like, I'm there trying to consume it, and I'm just like, I don't like the taste, I don't like the smell, like everything in my inner being. Maybe I can't like rationally. Maybe it's even, you could even say that it's not unhealthy or poisonous, but like, so I can't give a rational, hyper rational reason why I have this aversion and this feeling of disgust, but it's there. And I'm just there like trying to, I'm going on the internet and I'm blogging. I'm like, man, like I don't know why I can't just consume this thing. Like every time I try to, I don't like, it's like it's your body screaming at you. It's thousands and thousands of years of your ancestors screaming at you not to do that thing.
So yeah, that's a really useful analogy because it's like no one, like society didn't teach you to hate eating that thing, right? Like that's the thing, right? Like the jealousy thing is really interesting because a lot of a lot of people who promote non-monogamy, ethical non-monogamy, that they like you were taught, you were brainwashed by society to be possessive and jealous, and you just got to get over that social conditioning. And it's like actually you're the one who's trying to socially condition the rest of us into eliminating that very natural feeling, right? Like it's very interesting, like this, there's like a lot of topsy-turvy beliefs around what's natural and what's not, and like they think that what's natural has been socially conditioned, but then what's socially conditioned is actually what's like the natural thing. I mean, it reminds me of like the kind of weird gymnastics involved with trying to thread the needle around the like men and women and like the trans stuff. Like, I wrote this thing on X like a while back about how I guess the belief is if you're if you're a man, like if there's a male who wants to dress up and behave like a woman, he was born that way. And if there's a female who likes to dress up and behave like a woman, she was brainwashed by society. Like that's kind of where we're at now, right? Like the man who wears the dress and does all these things, like that's, they were born that way. Who are you to judge? But oh, a woman behaves in a feminine manner, like, oh, she was taught to be, to behave like that and she needs to break out of it. And it's like very inconsistent. It doesn't make sense. But that's where we are now, right? Like now you have to get over like like nature is the thing to get over, and the way that they believe that we get over it is by telling us that it's social conditioning.
I find that in modern Western society, we spend, well, certainly we spend a lot of time pontificating. We're pontificating right now.
Mm,
And sometimes I wonder if that's part of the problem, right? People are just spending too much time like in their own heads. Even when people talk about like mental health and all that stuff, it's like, I think if you literally just keep your body physically moving and you're doing hard things and you're taking on tasks and you've got real battles against yourself, fellow man, nature, the environment, animals, whatever it is, you're struggling to survive. Like you don't have time for anxiety. You don't have time for depression. Like you're just getting on with all these things. And I do wonder if now we just live in this time where people spend so much time in their own heads and then they spend time in other people's heads via social media, right? Like you're seeing, like, you're not even meant to be able to see so many people's opinions and thoughts and ideas and so much information. It doesn't even matter what country you live in, right? Wherever you live, there can be something crazy that happens today in, I don't know, something crazy happens in Australia, and within a matter of minutes, people in the USA, in the UK, all over the world, they're all aware of it, they're all talking about it. I can be chilling in Dubai and I'm like, oh, this is what's going on today in California, this is what's going, whereas in the past, not so long ago, it's like, cool, you've just got your own local issues. You're not seeing all these horrible and crazy things that are happening elsewhere, and you're not seeing everyone else is running commentary on it 24/7 with infinite scroll. And I'm like, this is why people are going crazy. I'm blessed to have a personality that's like very low in neuroticism. So compared to most people, I'm very insensitive to like negative feelings and emotions and whatever. But most people are not wired that way. And if you're
mm,
someone who is more emotionally sensitive and prone to these negative emotions, and all day, every day, you're just continuously scrolling through this thing for hours a day that's just amplifying things to make you anxious. Here's another thing to be afraid of. Here's another terrible thing that happens. Oh, here's a video of like some violent incident. Here's another terrible thing that's going on. Here's something to make you disgusted. Here's something to make you angry from, if you're on the left, here's something from the right to annoy you. If you're on the right, here's something from the left to annoy, right? And there's literal algorithms that are like feeding it to you. And then you turn it off and you're eating your meal and you turn on TV, whether it's CNN, it's Fox News, it's whatever, and they're still battering you with more and more and more information. And there's people consuming this for, I mean, what's the average? I think the average American watches 2 hours of TV a day and spends about
mm,
4 hours on 3 to 4 hours on social media. It's something around that level.
mm,
Um, and you have to keep in mind that for every person who watches no TV, that means that there's another person watching like 4, 6, 8 hours of it.
mm.
And I'm just like, there's many reasons why people are, going crazy, but some of them seem quite sort of obvious to me because it's just like, well, human beings are not meant to live like this. And then on top of it, you put in all these, broken family situations, lack of community, decline of faith, decline in physical health. People are quite literally eating garbage,
Mm,
drinking too much. People, I'm just like, man, this is quite a. If I were an evil person and I wanted to sort of put together a cocktail to make people mentally and physically sick, it would be hard to come up with a better combination than the sort of like standard American diet and the sort of all the social cultural media diet
yeah.
that is just sort of being fed to people en masse.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, now you really have to exert like extremely high agency over your own life to guard yourself from all of the temptations around like easily accessible, processed, disgusting food that tastes really good but is really bad for you. It's been optimized to be that way, right? Like these companies spend so like food companies and social media companies hire, the world's top food scientists or behavioral scientists and software engineers, and they have unlimited resources to basically optimize um, for food, right? There's this idea of the bliss point where like a potato chip has the optimal level of crunch to make you want to keep consuming those chips. And I think, yeah, social media is the same way. There was a study a few years ago which found that on this is back when it was still called Twitter, that certain words predicted virality, and these were words. Most of them were negative words like attack, blame, bad, kill, hate. For each one of those words that someone would put in a tweet, it increased the likelihood of being retweeted by 15%. Um, And so and this was a few years ago. Maybe the algorithm has changed. I think maybe it's not quite as toxic, but it's still, it's still present. There's this idea of the 1% rule on the internet, which I think is helpful. At least it's been helpful for me. Like when I scroll and when I see what I'm exposed to online, which is basically, it's like a rule of thumb that only 1% of people on social media actually post on a regular basis. Um, 9% of people will comment or like or engage or interact with those posts. And 90% of people are just lurkers who don't do anything except just scroll. They don't engage at all. And so we have the situation where like 99% of the population is scrolling social media. And well, 90% say are looking at 1% of the population sharing their thoughts and their ideas on a regular basis, and 9% kind of interacting with those posts. And they get this very warped view of what the dominant prevailing opinion is. Another study on X was how 2% of users produce 80% of the tweets. I mean, and I find it funny because like I follow, I think like say like I have like 600 some people I follow. You're one of them, and so I'm following 600 high profile people, and but it's like even among those 600 relatively high profile people that I follow, it's really only like 50 of them that I see pop up on my feed on a regular basis. And then among those 50, it's really like 5 or 10 that love to tweet a lot. And so then it's like, okay, people are scrolling and looking at things, and they're like, they get this warped view of, oh, everyone's talking about X. And it's like, really, no, it's like your favorite 10 influencers or 15 people that you like to follow or keep track of their ideas and posts. And the rest of us, yeah, we get this, we're not thinking about what we're not seeing and what people who aren't posting, what they're thinking about and what they're concerned about. And I think this is like, this is something that people tend to overlook, especially when they're stunned by, like who tends to like what do normal people care about? They don't care about like a lot of the culture war issues and this, that, and the other. Like they care about their families. They're trying to make a good living for themselves. They're trying to get promoted and so on. And but yeah, I think like more and more, like you said, as families and communities are deteriorating and there's not a lot of connection, sadly, I think like, yeah, more and more people are turning their attention onto social media and getting their connection in that way. And yeah, I think people need to be mindful that like it's still not reality though. It's still not what the dominant majority are talking about, just a small segment.
Yeah, for sure. There's something that maybe I'm going to coin it on this podcast, but there's certainly various forms of like terminally online brain, and you see this in you see this in people's beliefs about different topics, where I'm like, you've been spending way too much time on the internet if you think that that is true, right? So okay,
Mm,
let me try to think of a good example. You get it in the political world, you get it in the social world, in the cultural world, in the dating and relationships world. So okay, let's take for example this idea that I don't know, 20% of the men or 10% of the men get like 80 or 90% of like all the
yeah.
women, and if you're not like the top guy, then there is no chance for you.
Mhm,
I
mhm,
see that opinion a lot on the internet. I hear it on podcasts. I see it on YouTube channels and so on. And then I go outside. Like
mhm.
I travel a lot. I go outside and I just see like very, very regular, very, very average people coupling up all the time, all over the world, in every different town, in every different city, right? It's not like, oh, this guy's the top G. This guy's like got everything. And it's just like he's just like a complete normal guy from Poland or like from wherever. You know what I mean? Like he's
Yeah,
just a normal guy
just a
and he's got
dude.
his girlfriend, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. I could be in Colombia, I could be in Qatar, South Africa, Nigeria, USA, UK, whatever. I'm just seeing like normal people coupling up all the time, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. They're just normal, average people. But then the terminally online brain is like, no, 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 like that's not happening. Like these are the stats and this is how it. I'm like, bro, go outside and just like observe with your own eyes. Another thing is like, I don't know, like the idea that even some of the woke stuff. So say for example, like I don't know, all the pronouns thing, or like all, everyone is going trans or whatever. And you're like, have you ever in real life, maybe in academic settings, perhaps you have experienced this, Rob, but I have never come across a real world situation where anybody asks for anybody's pronouns. or when people don't just assume gender right off the bat. Like everyone, I'm assuming I'm talking to conservatives and progressives and liberals and apolitical people. Everyone assumes gender all the time. No one meets me and is like, oh, like, or, are you a he, him, or are they that? Everyone just assumes I'm a he, him. So, like, again, you go online and you see like all these weird accounts with their
Hmm.
pronouns in their bio and they're talking this and they have like these weird sort of rituals that they're going through. And then in the real world, you're just like, this is not a thing. Like
Yeah.
people are generally just not doing this. Another one, and maybe this is the biggest one, is the perception that everything is so incredibly bad, and that, like, say for example, I say, okay, this is a good example because in the next 10 days, right now I'm in Miami, but in the next 10 days, I'm also going to Las Vegas, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. If I say I'm going to Vegas, I'm going to San Francisco, I will get many, many comments telling me not to go, or to, take my bulletproof vest, or like this, or right. Like I'm going to, I will, like, people genuinely concerned about my safety, and genuinely this. And, and I get where this comes from, because anytime you're seeing these things on the news, it's the same way that I'm sure you've come across people in the UK who are afraid to go to the USA because they think they're
Hmm.
going to get shot, or they're going to
Yes.
bump into a racist police officer. So by the nature of the things that go viral,
Hmm.
or the
Hmm.
things that make the news, it tends to be the worst of humanity. It's these abnormalities, these weird situations, like very weird things going on, and then people make it out like the entire, oh, don't go to London, don't go to London, like you're going to be the victim of like knife crime or this or this. And I'm like, bro, like, again, get off the internet. Like you've been you and I think it's weird because people become convinced it's true, because the truth is we now have access to so much information
Yeah.
that I'm sure that if you wanted to, you can easily find 100 plus videos, 1,000 plus videos of terrible things happening in London, right? you
Hmm.
can you can find like 1,000 videos of people getting assaulted, and people are like, well, Zuby, how are you saying it's not true? Look at this video, look at that video, look at that. I'm like, bro, what you are not seeing is all of the billions of interactions. Like,
Yes.
all of these situations are anomalies. The fact that you can find 1,000 of them doesn't mean they're not anomalies, because there's
Hmm.
no news story of it was a nice day in London and people got on well with each other. Oh, it's a sunny day in Chicago and people like went for picnics, and no one got, nothing crazy happened. It's only when those incidents happen. And now, of course, everyone has smartphones, everyone has video cameras on them all the time, everyone has cameras on them all the time. So it's not just that you hear about the story, but you also see it. You
Hmm.
see it all the time, right? You can find 1,000 videos of police assaulting people, killing people, doing bad things, 1,000 videos over the last 20 years. And people are like, well, how are you denying that the problem is as bad as it is? Look at all of this evidence. So it sort of seems like it's true, but it's also not reality in terms of what is normal.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the very fact that those things grab our attention, that they go viral, that they enter the media in the first place, it's because they're anomalous events, right? Like, yeah, like you said, no one is going to write a news story about like, oh, a neighbor went across the street to check in on their elderly so and so to make sure they're okay. Like, that's not going to make the front page of the New York Times, right? Like, what makes the front page is someone killing their neighbor, or beating some innocent person, or robbing someone, or whatever, right? Like, everything that we see in the media by definition is unusual. That's why it's in there that's why it makes the news. That's why journalists are reporting on it, because they know it'll get eyeballs, they know that it'll get attention, because it violates what we expect in everyday life, which is actually we expect people to be kind, to be normal, to be nice, to be generous. And yeah, I mean, like I've heard that so many times from people about how, like, not non-Americans, because so yeah, I live in the UK, I was stationed in Germany for a while, like I've lived overseas for a long time. And so yeah, people, oh, like America, it's like just so many school shootings, so many guns, so much, I couldn't even imagine living there, what it would be like. And it's like the likelihood of getting shot at all in general in America is like you have a greater likelihood of being hit by lightning like 10 times, I think, or some, it's just so unlikely. But yeah, they here the media will endlessly cover some event, and that becomes the people's anchor for what reality is like. It's just, yeah, the dating thing that drives me up the wall too. Like, to hear, oh, like, oh, I saw this thing online about how women will only swipe on this number or that number, and it's like, well, dating apps are becoming popular. I think there's a bit of a dip now. I think more and more young people are actually refusing to use them because it's been saturated and because of all the accompanying issues with them. But only about 30 to 40% of young adults have ever downloaded a dating app and actually used them. It's a plurality of people meet through dating apps, but it's not the majority. Um, and most people still are not meeting their partners through online dating, especially in places like university environments or sort of young professional situations, and just outside of that space. And so when like these guys, oh, like if you're not 6 feet tall, if you don't, it's like it just like if you go outside, you'll see guys who aren't 6 feet tall and they have a girlfriend, right? Like most people are actually not single. I think actually the largest number of people who are single are young men, but I think a lot of it is because of those self-defeating behaviors, those debilitating like doubts and everything. And it's like, when like before I was had any level of recognition, when I was just a regular dude, like if you just go out and like talk to girls, like eventually you'll get a girlfriend. Like that's just nature, right? Like that's just half of the population are women. You just go out and talk to people. Most people throughout history have figured it out. So yeah, I think it's really toxic. I think a lot of these guys, I'll play armchair psychologist for a second here, but I think a lot of these guys are afraid of rejection. They're afraid to put themselves out there. And so to basically avoid that uncomfortable experience in the first place of approaching and taking risks and talking to a girl, instead they just like immerse themselves in these statistics and develop these elaborate, pseudoscientific uh, explanations for why it's hopeless and why they shouldn't even bother in the first place. They'll hear some story about some guy getting cheated on, and oh, that's how women are. And so then I'm not, you might as well just not talk to women because you're going to get cheated on. And they just, they cling to these outlier events so that they themselves don't have to be courageous in their own sort of in that way that young men have to be, and be prepared to be rebuffed or turned down. And that's just part of, we used to accept that it's kind of part of young adulthood. It's just part of life that if you like a girl, she may turn you down. That's okay. Like that's just life, like anything else. But now it's like no one wants to take that risk anymore. I think, yeah, it's just all of that stuff online on social media, and it does spill out. Because what was funny, like I'm old enough, and I think you're probably old enough to see like what started on the internet in like whatever red pill, Reddit, manosphere, that kind of stuff. Like it was kind of niche, it was kind of weird. A lot of it was just like it was internet culture, and that is now the dominant culture. Like now I talk to like handsome, good-looking jocks who will like talk about red pill stuff. And it's like 10 years ago, that archetypal dude, the captain of the football team is not talking about red pill Reddit, but now they are. Like it's mind-blowing just how steeped into this kind of internet culture young people are. And yeah, I don't think it's in the long run, I don't think it's going to be good. We're due for a correction, I think, of just young people have always met each other. They've gone on dates, they figured it out, and well, I think we'll get there, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah, I hear that. People always say the internet isn't real life or social media isn't real life, which is partially true, but somewhat not, because it's like, well, the people you are seeing there are real people. And as someone who has been active on social media for well over 15 years now, I do notice that you can predict what's going to happen in real life, oftentimes based on social media, because you'll see it there first. You'll see it on the internet first, and then 2 to 5 years down the line, you'll really start to see it sort of seeping into real world conversations, even with the language. So I remember the first time, here's an interesting one, Rob. I remember like it must have been around 2014 or 2015. I remember the first time I discovered the whole pronoun in bio people, right? I went down this rabbit hole. I was on Twitter. It was like 2014, 2015. And someone had like commented on something, and I went to their profile and I saw like she, her, or he, him. I can't remember who was a man or a woman. And I was like, what's that? I was like, why is that? I was genuinely confused. I was like, what's going on here? And then, it was like, people now say the word woke, but at the time, people used to say social justice warrior, right? SJW. And, it was all like these left leaning accounts. And I found like I discovered like a subculture because they were all. I looked at like the other people this individual was talking to, and I click on their profile, and I'm seeing like she, her, he, him, that, and I'm like, what on earth is going on here? Like, why do all of these people have like their I remember the first time I ever saw it. Like I'd never heard of it in real life. I'd never like I hadn't heard about like stuff going on at universities or whatever. It was like kind of early. And I was just like, what on earth is all of this stuff going on? And then there was this sort of like mainstreaming of it to the point where,
Mm.
now on whether it's LinkedIn or it's someone's email signature or whatever. But like I saw it first. There's so many things that I first saw on social media and I didn't know it was a thing. And then a couple years later down the line, I'm like, oh boy, okay, this is actually like a thing. I thought this was
Mm.
just like a weird internet, cult or joke or something. So
A
there is some
joke.
predictive,
That's funny.
there's some predictive power
Yeah.
in some of these things. They do start affecting reality.
Yeah, it does, like, it has this kind of it spreads throughout, it catches on. I mean, a lot of this stuff, like, yeah, it starts on internet culture, or a lot of it is it's birthed in, universities, and, I mean, yeah, you mentioned before, like, have I seen this in my day-to-day life? Like, sadly, I have to like, yes, like, regrettably, I've seen it. I saw it at Yale, I see it at Cambridge, like, I've seen it at other universities where I think it kind of reached its peak probably in like 2018 or 2019. I think like the pandemic and lockdown stuff kind of like affected it in like day-to-day interactions, but I still see it everywhere in like email signatures. Like a lot of professors and administrators and people who work in academia, it's like, yeah, they, them, she, whatever. Yeah, I don't even, it's just so ridiculous. Like I've refused to do it. Um, I do know, like, I do know people who have like used it strategically, where like suddenly they'll adopt they them pronouns at a certain point in grad school because they know when they apply for a postdoc or an assistant professorship, and they mark that they're gender non-binary or trans or whatever, but like they present as just an ordinary, and these have been women, um, that there's like in case they need like a paper trail of like, okay, you identify as trans, how long have you done this? And they say, oh, I've been doing it for the last 4 years. And if someone happens to like look at an old email from 2019 or something, it's like, oh yeah, they've been a they them since 2019, so yeah, this is a trans person, despite not really changing their appearance or anything else. And like it's like a calculated strategy a lot of these people use. I think a lot of them are lunatics and unhinged and sad and weird people. A lot of them are smart and careerists and will do what's necessary to play the game, um, and will be a they them for 4 years in order to position themselves for a good a professorship. So it's just wild what's happened. I mean, the pronoun thing, on like, yeah, just floored me when I arrived on campus in 2015. I
Okay, yeah.
started college when I was 25. So I was already older. I was getting out of the Air Force. I had just been discharged. I got out in August, started classes in September, and I started hearing about this pronoun stuff. And I was like, this is weird. Like, but then it just like pervasive. Suddenly it was everywhere. Suddenly it was in email signatures. Suddenly, yeah. And I'm like, this is insane. It's one, like, I get it. At the time I tried to understand it, and it was like, okay, if you're a trans person and you want people to refer to you in a certain way, fine, whatever. I'll call you whatever you want. But it was to normalize and to make people feel, and it's like clearly you're a woman, like you're dressed like a woman. You want people to know you're a woman based on the way you're dressed, like, but you're trying to tell everyone that you're a she, her, and it's like, you don't need to tell us. Like it was so bizarre. That was like one of the many kind of points of,
Mm.
you know, concern that I had when I was going through the academic system.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I mean, I was in university 2004 to 2007, and it's amazing how much these campuses have just changed since then. Like if I
Mm.
think back to that time, to some people it sounds like it was, if to a 20-year-old listening to this, it's going to sound like a very long time ago. But for me, it
Yeah.
really doesn't seem that long ago. And it's like all of these ideas that have just sort of like sprung up and rooted in the past decade. I'm just like, man, this was not a thing. I met some students from Oxford not long ago, and they recognize me and were following me online and whatever, and agree with a lot of my stances, and they were kind of like actually thanking me for pushing back on some of this stuff, because they were like, man, like even in Oxford we've got to deal with this and this and this. And I was like, dude, like when I was there, just none of this was a thing. You had
Mhm.
people who were politically right, people who were politically left, but like the liberals and progressives were like relatively sane. They weren't sort of pushing these very strange ideologies and ideas, and certainly were not like forceful with it. Nobody was getting deplatformed. No one was trying to like cancel anyone or whatever. It was just like, okay, cool. Yeah, there's people with different ideas and opinions, and we can have some healthy debates, but we can all still be friends, and we can just like chill or whatever. There were none of these clashes. Um, I got protested for the first time in 2022 in
Mm.
Florida, of all places. I spoke at
Mm.
Stetson University in Florida, and I was not. Funnily enough, I was giving a speech on free speech, but it was the first time I'd been to an event, and dozens of people showed up with like signs, and like I was like, this is for me. This is like little old friendly me. I was like, geez, what did I do? Um,
Mm.
and it was
Wow.
fascinating because the people who came to protest me, most of them didn't even know why. Like
Mm.
their signs had nothing, one person's holding a BLM sign, one person's holding a trans lives matter signs, people are holding rainbow flags, people are just like there's no coherent through line between all of the things. And then even during the Q&A and everything, like because I invited them in. I was like, cool, like if you guys came to protest me, if you've got questions you want me to answer, again, I just gave a free speech on free speech. Let's have some free speech. And there were a couple handful, who had researched my tweets, and like they'd pulled up some tweets and taken some issue with them. That was also hilarious, by the way, Rob, because the first angry protester, there was this girl, and she came and she had like a rainbow flag or a trans flag or whatever, and she was very she was like, so like she had like a serious face, and she looked angry, and she was ready to like confront this far right supervillain or whatever on her campus. And she was like, okay, what did you mean by this tweet? I've been going through your tweets, da da da. And she's like, what did you mean by this one? And she says, so I had a tweet that went viral, and it said, ladies, if your boyfriend has he him in his bio, you have a girlfriend. And so
Oh,
and,
God.
and so she read the tweet out loud, and the entire room burst into laughter, including half of the protesters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so good.
And she's there like with this straight face, like trying to be like all angry, and she's like, what, like demanding me to like explain it. And I was like, do you really want me to explain it? That people are just like laughing, and I was like, it's a joke. And she's like, yeah, but she's like, were you being sexist, misogynistic, or transphobic, or all of them? And I
I
was
like
like,
she give you a menu. Which of these are?
yeah, it was just the whole thing was it was such a strange and
Oh
surreal
my
experience,
God.
but it was interesting, and at least half of the protesters left there, and I'm sure in their brain they were like, oh, actually, like he's a nice guy.
Mm.
Because I just treat some of them came at me with like the anger of the event, and I was just super polite. I didn't insult anybody. I answered all of their questions. I even invited people to like hang out with me in the green room afterwards, including some of the protesters, just to like sit down and chat. Oh, cool! Like what brought you here tonight? What are you studying? Like just talking to people like normal human beings.
Yeah,
Because I don't know,
yeah.
I don't know what they expected. I think they expected me to be like this evil. I don't know what they expected, but it's
Mhm,
just like
mhm.
you just don't give them that energy at all, and they're suddenly like feeling a little bit silly that they've spent 4 hours sort of dedicate of their evening dedicated to like fighting against you, when they're just like, oh, okay, like we don't share the same political views on everything, but you're clearly not like evil. You don't hate me. There was one girl, I was like, why did you come here to protest? And she was like, oh, like I have friends who are trans and in the LGBT community, and I'd heard that like you were like that you hate them, or that you're attacking. I was like, because I did like my deadlift tweet, you know what I mean? You're just like that means that I like hate people now. And I was just like, yeah, like no, like there's no hatred, there's no animosity. Like I'm not on board with the whole trans ideology. I don't think a man can be a woman. I don't think men should be competing in female sports, but none of that is rooted in any type of hatred or animosity of anybody. It's rooted in biology and what makes sense and actually what is fair to women. Miss Young Woman, you know what I mean? It's like strange that you'd think these things would be a bit more obvious, but I learned that you kind of have to walk them through it sometimes.
Yeah, that's so like it's weird that concern or criticism or questions gets conflated with hate. Like if you say that, yeah, a man can't be a woman, then suddenly you hate. Like why does that become the natural next step? Is like because hate is a very strong word and it's like a very powerful. I mean, that's probably why they use it, honestly. But like like why does that become like the terminology that they use? And it just seems like so exaggerated, so histrionic to jump to that point that like if someone criticizes a group or has a question about a particular person's behavior, like some man who adopts she her pronouns and then like wins the swimming competition or something, and you're just like, isn't this a little ridiculous? And it's like, oh, now you hate this entire category of people. Like, why? What? Like that's just insane. And yeah, a lot of people are sort of adopting that very like simple-minded mentality of like
Mhm.
there's like a weird dearth of critical thinking of what does it actually mean to hate someone? Why is that word used so frequently? I also find it interesting like how frequently hate is used in our society in general, standing against hate or we're opposing hate or fighting hate, and very little attention and energy is invested in the idea of love. um, and I think like my suspicion, my hunch is that like love sounds frivolous or unserious or airy fairy. It's not real. It's like this, just an emotional touchy feely thing. But hate is like serious, and hate is maybe people aren't capable of love, but everyone's capable of hate, and we have to stand against hate. There's something going on
Mhm.
there that I need to think through this a bit more clearly. But I don't
Yeah.
understand why we can't just say like we're all for love versus we're all
Mhm.
against hate. Like those, like why
I
why
do
does
you know,
one energize people more than the other?
I think it's easier to rally people around negative emotions.
Hmm.
You see this. I mean, this it's true in marketing for sure. It's true in
Mhm.
marketing. It's true in the media. It's easier to capture people's attention and to energize them by striking some type of fear into them. If I have a product, it doesn't even matter what it is. I can market it based on the positives or the benefits, and I can try to sell that, or I can make it sound like there's some massive existential crisis going on, whether it's regards to your health, your finances, your family, whatever it is. Hey, like this giant threat is coming down the pipeline. You need to pay attention to this. And I would guess that just because as human beings, we've always had to be very sensitive to threats. So if someone says like this thing or this person or this word or this idea is rooted in is about hate, or in
Mhm.
and we need to stand against this, then I think people sort of pay more attention immediately.
Mm.
And that would be my guess. I've noticed that a lot of people rally around what they are against rather than what they're for. it's
Mhm.
it's why even with the way I communicate and things I say, like I've had people, for example, call me like anti woke.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I'm very careful to not describe myself by the things that I'm against. I
Mhm.
think it's
Mhm.
much better to describe yourself by the things that you're for or in favor of, right? Like you can go
Mhm.
on some people's profiles and like they'll tell you everything that they're opposed, right? They're anti MAGA, they're anti hate, they're anti religion, they're anti fascist, they're anti all these things. But it's like, okay, but like, what are you for? What do you believe? What do you like?
Mhm.
And a lot of people's time, even some influencers, right? They spend all their time about, this is what I dislike, this is what like everything they don't like. You're very, very aware of that. But I'm like, okay, but what do you like? What do you support? What are the ideas that you think are better than the bad ideas you criticize?
Mhm. Mhm.
So with myself and the way I communicate, I do my best to focus more on like, look, okay, these are the things that I am for. These are the things I'm in favor of. These are the things I think are good and wholesome. I could spend all day just like, I mean, I could have spent, I could put out 100,000 tweets over the past 5 years, like just criticizing woke stuff. It's not hard to do, right? There's a lot of stupid stuff out there. I could just spend all day, every day, just being the, look, this is stupid, this is stupid, this is stupid. Here's why this doesn't make sense. And once in a while, if I think something is particularly harmful or destructive, I'll say, okay, like this is a bad idea, and here is why. It's really what I did with the deadlift tweet. I did it in a humorous way, but it's like, look, this is a really bad idea, and let me show you why. Let me not tell you, let me show you why. Like leaving the
Mm,
door this wide open for any big bearded man like me to just like step in here and do this thing. This is why it's a bad idea. I can sit all day talking to you about testosterone levels and muscle strength and density and upper body strength and like all the reasons why, males are faster and stronger than females. Or I can just lift up that weight with ease, a weight that like no woman in England is able to lift, and just
yeah.
demonstrate to you, okay, this is why this idea is really, really silly. But I think with it all, you have to have a sense of humor.
I wonder, this thought occurred to me just now. It would be so funny if like an act like a man who was extremely big and strong, identified as a woman, and broke the male deadlifting record and can receive some notoriety and fame for being the first woman to break the male deadlifting record. Like that would be so funny, man. Like to have some, it would be like because like the kind of guy who could deadlift the most weight in the world, he would, he'd do it as a troll, he would do it as a lark, right? And it would be funny to say like, I'm smashing the patriarchy, like that'd be so funny, man. Like that idea of like what you're against versus what you're for reminds me of like if you walk around university campuses, sometimes you'll see those like booths or stands for like basically like the local socialist movements, and often their pamphlets and their shirts and the iconography around it is like smash capitalism, or like destroy the corporate whatever. Like it's a lot of like violent verb followed by whatever noun they're against, like smash, destroy, whatever. And it's like none of like, okay, you're socialist and you're and or communist. In many cases they're actually communists, and they'll say like the aim is to basically like level wealth and help the poor and so on, but it's all about who they hate. They hate like the energy around them feels like they hate the rich more than they want to help the poor, right? Like you'll see people with shirts that say eat the rich, but I've never seen
Eat the rich.
anyone with a shirt that says feed the poor, right? Like what are you actually concerned about? Attacking the rich or helping the poor? Like why not feed the poor? Why is it eat the rich, right? And it's like I think there is also this like underlying resentment and angry and anger, and it's just like a safe, acceptable way to channel that like internal rage. It's very odd. I mean, do we actually care about helping people, or is it all about, taking down your adversaries and, sniping at your enemies? It's
Mm.
yeah, I think it's something I think we should, yeah, we're thinking about for a lot of these groups.
No doubt, man. 100%. Rob, you are one guy who I could talk to for hours and hours and hours on end, but I want to be respectful of your time. I'll definitely have you back on the podcast sometime in the future. But tell people a little bit about your book. Here's your chance to plug yourself. Where can people find and follow you online?
Yeah, they can follow me on X at Rob K. Henderson, my Substack, robkhenderson.com. And yeah, my book, Troubled, a Memoir of Foster Care, Family, and Social Class, out February 20th. Yeah, it's been endorsed by a lot of notable people, including Jordan Peterson, among others. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting the book out there and seeing what people think. So yeah, Zuby, I'd love to come back. This has been great. Thanks so much, man.
Awesome, Rob. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man. I appreciate you.